Hey folks, welcome to chapter 2, being ethical and socially responsible. What we're going to talk about today in the next, 15, 20 minutes is we're going to talk about how ethics and social responsibility play parts within how we conduct business. A couple of things I want you to know. CSR is going to be a term I refer to, which is corporate social responsibility. Those are specific programs that companies come up with to try and make an impact socially. There's also a new acronym called ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. And so you might hear ESG, CSR. CSR is the older language. ESG is kind of the newer language that we're moving into. And so let's go ahead and jump in. I will tell you, when I think about CSR, effective CSR programs in business, we automatically go right to Patagonia. I know we talk about Patagonia in class, but they have an amazing CSR ESG program, so much so that Yvon Chouinard sold his company to a nonprofit to, one, make it more sustainable, but also make the work that they're doing in CSR more sustainable, and kind of takes that corporate governance piece out of the equation. And so Patagonia, I think of companies like the Container Store or Herman Miller chairs, which we'll talk about later, or Athleta, or Whole Foods. These are all companies that have amazing CSR programs. Even companies like Chase. Jamie Dimon has done a great job in banking to create a CSR program that has really flourished. So let's jump into this right now. Again, we're going to talk about ethics within business and then CSR, ESG. So the next thing we'll look at, or the first thing we'll look at, is business ethics. So ethics basically is the application of moral standards to business situations. What I want you to think about here, it's when we think about ethics in business, there's a lot of gray, and it may not be the best or the right answer or the wrong answer. Sometimes in business, it's the best answer. And in class, we'll talk a little bit about that. But what I want you to consider is, what is most important as you think about these issues. What is more important? A business's responsibility to society, its employees, or to its stockholders, right? Who's more important within a business? And then two, who determines the moral standard of a business? Is it the CEO? Is it the CFO? Is it the government? Is it the customers? Is it the vendors? What part of the stakeholder model has more influence on dictating moral standards in business? Two things I really want you to think about, okay? So ethical issues are basically be categorized in four areas. So fairness and honesty, and that's business people are expected to refrain from knowingly deceive or intimidate others. So that's fairness and honesty. Organizational relationships. A business person should not put the welfare of others and that of the organization above his or her own personal welfare. Third, conflict of interest. Issues arise when business people take advantage of a situation for personal gain rather than the employer's interests. I mean, just think about insider trading. That's kind of the big one. Or stealing trade secrets from a company to go start your own company. So those are some conflicts of interest. And then finally, communications. Business communications that are false, misleading, or deceptive are both illegal and unethical. The company that comes to mind right off the bat for me is Juul, the vape company. Juul lost a $400+ million lawsuit because they advertised to children, and they advertised in a manner that made the product seem less harmful than it truly is. And in fact, state of California is trying to enact legislation even today to do away with all vapes, not just Juul, primarily Juul because they were very deceptive, but just vapes in general because they target children. They may not say they target children, but the way they advertise does. And so again, communication needs to be ethical. It needs to be accurate. It cannot be misleading or deceptive. Look at everything that happened with the previous elections where it was, whatever side you're on, it doesn't matter. But there were a lot of ads out there. There was a lot of information out there saying the election was a fraud and all that. And that's all deceptive information, okay? And so as business people, we need to look at these 4 ethical issues and understand that we need to be above these and do what's right. So we'll talk about this again in class. Here's the thing that you need to think about when you're considering ethics in your behavior. There's going to be different times when you may think differently. And so at the beginning of the year in sales, maybe you're like, hey, we're going to be ethical. We're going to only sell what we need to sell. We're going to make sure our customers have exactly what they need. If you're not hitting your budget towards the end of the year, you may say, oh, maybe I need to cut some corners. Maybe I need to just not be deceptive, but just, little white lies to get my customer to buy because I'm not going to hit my target for budget. So what I try and think of is we need to have the ethics, our foundational ethics the same, whether they're good times or bad times, right? Whether we're hitting budget, exceeding budget, or falling below budget, right? Whether we're initiating a new product or selling an old, true, reliable product. We need to make sure that our ethics stay grounded and stay consistent. So one thing I want you to consider, have you ever had to do something you thought might be or knew was wrong, but felt you didn't have a choice or that it was worth the risk? Maybe your manager told you to do something, or maybe, again, you needed to make that sale or you needed to get that product out and you cut corners to do it, okay? Think about that. Next, let's look at the levels of ethical behavior. So again, there's 3 levels that affect ethical behavior. They're individual factors, social factors, and then opportunity. Individual factors basically just incorporate, how was I raised? What do I believe? What are my morals? What are my values? What's my deeper purpose? What's my why? All those things are going to affect the individual factors of ethical behavior. The social factors are, what does it mean to the greater community that I do this? Again, Juul, the vape company, was pressured. I mean, there were so many social issues going around, particularly during COVID, when they were seeing, signs of people who did vape got sicker. And so those social issues were happening. Children vaping too much, children dying and becoming sick because of it. So all these social factors affected how the government responded to that. So if society has these norms that they've placed on certain things, how are you going to react to those? Are you going to react in the same way or differently? And then opportunity. Again, this is where it's like, okay, I have the opportunity to do something, and all I have to do is just push the limits just a little bit, fudge my ethics just a little bit to make this sale or to get this product out or to start this business or to get this tax break, right? So many times people fudge on their taxes because they're going to get a little bit more of a tax refund. And so is there an opportunity there for that to happen? And do you fudge your ethics, or do you stay consistent? Okay, so those are the things that you need to think about. The government's role in encouraging ethics. Really, the government, in my personal opinion, shouldn't be able to dictate to us how we should act. Somebody in Washington shouldn't tell me how I should act here in the state of California. Even somebody in government in San Diego shouldn't tell me how I should act. I should be able to understand what my ethical responsibilities are and act accordingly. And I think that's, unfortunately, there's people who have no ethics who then the government has to step in. One perfect example, obviously, is the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. And that was meant to discourage companies from falsely reporting revenues or falsely reporting profits, particularly when it comes to public companies, to falsify their financial records to show that they made more money, which increases investor investment, right? Stockholder investment. And what happens is with Sarbanes-Oxley, Enron falsified their documentation. The company had to go bankrupt because they were found out. Everybody who owned stock in Enron lost all their money, and most of the stockholders were employees, and it was their pension plan, so they lost their pensions, been putting into for 30 years. Arthur Andersen was the CPA firm that was responsible for making sure that they didn't do that. Arthur Andersen conspired with Enron to falsify documentation, and now both companies, Arthur Andersen's out of business. Enron still is doing a little bit of business, but Arthur Andersen went out of business. The largest public accounting firm in the world went out of business. Thousands of people lost money. Thousands of people lost their jobs. Thousands of people lost everything. And then hundreds of people actually died, committed suicide because they saw no hope in retirement and they lost all their life savings. And so, and I think maybe one person went to jail. And so what happened is the government came back, filed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and said, hey, going forward, here's how you need to act if you're a public company. And so the government stepped in when they needed to step in. That's the issue. The government needs to step in when they need to step in. But what they need to do is understand when to step in. They don't need to step in on every single issue. So there needs to be a good balance of me understanding as a citizen, as a business owner, I need to act accordingly, act by the right ethics, and the government needs to understand that they don't need to step in on every single little transaction. So it's a balance that is hard to manage, but I know they're hopefully working on it. So. Individual companies' role in encouraging ethics. 95% of all Fortune 1000 companies have a formal code of ethics or conduct. This is how we should act in every situation, right? And so they look at that. They have people, agree to this. And if you don't follow the code of ethics, you can be terminated. And so, now companies have chief ethics officers, which is great. So companies are, I believe more companies are moving towards CSR, ethics, ESG, and so, which is a great thing. Guidelines for making ethical decisions, there's 5 things. Listen and learn. Don't ever shut your mind or shut your ears or your eyes to what's happening. Recognize when a problem happens and take action, right? What is the ethical issue? Understanding, being able to identify and call out the ethical issue. Examine who it affects, right? Is it affecting your coworker? Is it affecting a vendor? Is it affecting a customer? Understand who it's affecting and how we can reconcile that, right? Create and analyze options, right? We're going to talk a little bit about Hosmer in class, and I think it's important to understand Hosmer's understanding of business ethics or leadership ethics, and we'll talk about that. But you have to have options, right? What are some of the options you're gonna be able to put in to potentially, hopefully, make sure this doesn't happen again? And then what's the best option from your point of view, from your company's point of view? But what is the best option, right? Again, it's not always going to be the perfect option. It's going to be the best option, right? And finally, you need to be able to explain your decision, right? You need to be able to explain your decision and resolve any differences that may arise from that, okay? So CSR, corporate social responsibility, or ESG, environment, sustainability, and governance. So social responsibility is the recognition that business activities have an impact on society and the consideration of the impact in business decision making. So here, well, we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but social responsibility costs money, but it also is good business. And we'll talk a little bit about what the pros and cons are. Corporate citizenship is adopting a strategic approach to fulfilling economic, ethical, environmental, and social responsibilities. And so I want you to consider, does a company's social responsibility affect your decision to do business with them? Do you have, in class we'll talk about this, what is your why? Why do you purchase the products that you purchase? Is it based on cost? Is it based on, the fact that they are a corporate citizen? Is it based on location? You need to think about why you buy the things you buy and if this plays any part in it. Okay? And so think about the brands that you purchase, the brands that you do business with, and do you have a say-so in how that company does work? And we'll talk about that again this week in class, and we'll discuss that. But this is what social responsibility is. There's two basically distinctive views on social responsibility. There's the economic model and there's the socioeconomic model. The economic model is all about production. We need to produce. We need to make sure that people have everything they need, everything they want and desire, right? It's all about exploitation of natural resources. It's all about internal market-based decisions. It's about economic return. So it's all about shareholder as opposed to stakeholder. It's all about, as a manager in the firm, am I getting my bonuses, right? Am I getting my bonuses? Am I getting what I need as a manager? And finally, government has minor and hopefully no control over what I do. Right? Let's eliminate the EPA. Let's eliminate the IRS. Let's eliminate all these organizations within the federal government that stifle what I want to do. Right? The second approach is the socioeconomic model. It's all about quality of life. It's all about conservation of natural resources. We can't cut any timber. We can't pull any coal. We can't mine for any lithium. It's all about market-based decisions with some community controls. It's all about balance of economic return and social return. It's all about firm and community's interests as opposed to the manager's interest. And it's all about active, intrusive government, right? These are two totally distinctive models. And do we need either of the two models, or is there a middle ground, right? There needs to be a middle ground. And again, we'll talk about this further in class. The pros and cons of social responsibility, basically the pros are, as a part of society, business can't ignore social issues. Another pro is business has to be in the means of tackling social problems, right? It can't be just the government. It can't be just the community. Business has to be involved in dealing with social issues. Addressing social problems can create a more stable environment. Social responsible decision-making prevents government intervention. If we're doing what we do and it's right what we do, the government will be less involved, hopefully. The cons are businesses are primarily responsible to their shareholders. So that's something we'll talk about. Corporate time, money, and talent should be used to create profit. Individual businesses can't be expected to solve problems affecting society in general. And then social issues are the problem of the government officials elected for that purpose. Okay? Again, it's two very distinctive ideas. Affirmative action. This is really interesting because we just had the Supreme Court say that affirmative action, when it pertains to universities, is unlawful. And so this is something really that we're going to deal a lot with. And is affirmative action still needed, right? Affirmative action is a plan designed to increase the number of minority employees and students at all levels of an organization, right? And again, students. Written plans are required for employers with federal contracts more than $50,000 per year. And then problems arise from the use of quotas and charges of reverse discrimination. We'll talk about that in class. But really, do we still need affirmative action? Have we moved to a space where we don't need it, or we still need it, right? Something to consider. And again, the state of California already had a law in place where affirmative action can't be used for the purposes of identifying students in universities. And so it's just something to think about. The EEOC, that's a government agency with the power to investigate complaints of employment discrimination and the power to sue firms that practice it. For you as an intern, the EEOC basically is trying to get you to get paid, right? They feel interns should get paid, and so they limit the ability for companies to do unpaid internships. So the EEOC is doing some great things. They also are a bureaucracy that can slow things down. So it's always something to think about when you think about government, particularly federal government, who is in Washington, we're in Southern California. A lot of the bureaucracy that happens slows down what we need to get done here in San Diego. And we should potentially allow our local elected officials to get that done. So anyway, but the EEOC does some great things. One of the things I want you to think about is, and we'll talk about this in class, relative earnings of males versus females. For every dollar earned by a man, only 82 cents are earned by women. That's happening today. Today, women are still underpaid. Same job, same education, same everything. Women earn 82 cents for every dollar men make. And so I just want you to know that. I just want you to understand that. And so there's the chart, kind of explains that. But it's something to think about. And I think it's terrible. That's the best way. I think it's terrible. Equal pay for equal work, as far as I'm concerned. Another one, sexual harassment and abuse behavior. It's bullying with sabotage, verbal abuse, overtones of sexual harassment, unwelcome sexual advantage. It's illegal. So I just want you to know that. We're not going to dig too much into this, but it is illegal. And a lot of retribution can happen, right? We've seen people go to jail now for it. We've seen companies fold because of it. And so it's wrong, and we need to understand it's wrong. It's never right. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in class as well if you have any questions on that. Environmental concerns. Here's the one thing I want you to think about. I'm not a tree hugger, folks. I'm a capitalist. But I can't build the home I need to build if we don't have trees, right? It's not a mutually exclusive thing to say we need environmental restrictions and I need to do business and make a lot of money, right? There's a company here in San Diego called Taylor Guitars. Taylor Guitars uses an ebony wood that's farmed in Africa to build this $5,000 amazing guitar. Well, what they found was they were clear cutting all the ebony, and they didn't have any more ebony to build these guitars. So they could no longer do business. They could no longer make this expensive guitar and make lots of money. So they decided to do something important and something special. And what they decided to do is they decided to plant, replant, and harvest from their own resource. They replanted what they deforested in Africa, and then in the same equatorial space in South America, they created their own forest of ebony, and they started harvesting from that. And now they have a sustainable resource to make this guitar. They're doing business. They're doing amazing business, and they're repopulating trees that they cut down. So I don't want you to think about environmentalism as, this left wing. If we don't have lumber, right? If we clear cut everything and don't have lumber, we don't build homes, we don't have desks, we don't have guitars, we don't have a lot of products. If we mine all of our lithium, if we mine all of our steel, if we don't take care of our water, folks, that's the big one. If we don't care for our water, we are in trouble. We don't have any more water coming, right? The water that we have on this planet is all the water we have. Okay, there's no, fairy water angel coming down to give us more water. If we do not care for our water, we will run out of water, and then we no longer do business. We no longer live, but we no longer do business. And so, again, it's not this left-wing thing. It's about doing good business. And one of the ways that we do good business is to make sure that we have the resources we need. And lastly, I'll speak on this because this is a very important topic to me. God calls on us to be stewards of his creation, right? Whether you believe in the Bible or not, or whether you're faith or not, God calls on us to be good stewards of the earth. I want to leave a better planet for my son and for you. And so these are the things we need to think about when we think about environmental concerns. One last thing, pollution. It's not just the government's responsibility or business responsibility to avoid pollution. It's all of our responsibility. The Exxon Valdez accident happened, 40 years ago, 30 years ago. And they are still seeing effects from that oil spill to this day, right? And so when we think about pollution, when we think about not having clean water, it affects us all, folks, and it affects business, okay? So I want you to think about that. A couple more slides. Environmental legislation. Again, the EPA, good, bad, bureaucracy. We need it, but how much of it do we need? If we do what we do responsibly, if we do business responsibility, we shouldn't need the EPA. But unfortunately, there are firms that still don't act accordingly, particularly when it comes into the environment. And so the EPA has to step in. And so, whether you think this current standards are too strict or not strict enough, that's on you. We need to make sure that we have the resources to continue to thrive and to continue to do business down the road. We can't just think about today. So, again, recycling is huge. We need to be able to recycle, but it's more than just recycling. There's so many other things. We need to think about identifying and eliminating inefficiencies, finding alternatives to uses for waste, and then recycle as much as possible. Herman Miller, a company I mentioned earlier, we'll talk about in class, but they have probably one of the most amazing recycling programs with their products. They make high-end, $5,000 chairs, but all their chairs, 95% of the chairs recyclable. And so it's something to think about. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, who should pay for a clean environment? It shouldn't just be the government, right? I thrive in a clean environment just as much as a business thrives in a clean environment, just as much as a government thrives in a clean environment. So it shouldn't just be it should be a community-driven action. It should be, a partnership between public, private, business. The three need to get together and make sure we have what we have. And in making just regulation after regulation after regulation isn't going to solve every issue. So that's it, folks. That was kind of a long one, but hopefully it was informative. Again, we'll talk more about this in class this week. And then if you have any questions in regards to the slide deck, just feel free to let me know. And have a great day. We'll talk to you later. Bye.